She left us for her yoga instructor. 26 years later, karma finally caught up. At 51, I thought I'd weathered every storm life could throw at me. 26 years ago, my wife Serafina walked out on me and our 3 children without warning, leaving me to pick up the shattered pieces of what I thought was an unbreakable family. What happened when she showed up at my door last month will shock you to your core. The night she abandoned us is burned into my soul like acid that never stops eating away at you. It was pouring rain, and she didn't even have the decency to wait until our babies were asleep. She stood in our modest living room, designer suitcase in her manicured hand, eyes completely vacant like she was already gone. I can still see our youngest, Connor, barely 4 years old, wrapping his tiny arms around her leg, sobbing, "Mommy, where are you going?" And this woman I'd worshipped for 8 years just stared through me like I was invisible and said those soul-crushing words, "I can't pretend anymore, Michael. I need to live my authentic life." Her authentic life, as it turned out, was a man named Vincent from her expensive yoga studio downtown. She vanished that night without a backwards glance. No tender goodbyes, no remorse, just the devastating silence and the sound of our front door slamming shut like the final nail in my family's coffin. I stood there completely paralyzed, holding the demolished remains of everything I believed in. I had to rebuild myself from nothing in mere hours because 3 innocent children no longer had a mother, just me and the brutal reality that the woman I'd have died for had chosen a stranger over the life we'd built together. That first year was absolute hell on earth. Madison, our oldest at 12, stopped speaking entirely for 7 months. Kevin, barely 11, started getting into vicious fights at school almost daily. Connor cried himself to sleep every single night for what felt like an eternity, and me? I worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat, packed countless lunches with shaking hands, learned to braid Madison's hair through YouTube videos, helped with homework, I barely understood myself, and sobbed in scalding showers while forcing a smile every damn day for my broken children. The whispers in our small community were relentless. Some blamed me outright, others pitied us like we were charity cases, but absolutely no one understood the crushing weight of trying to hold our home together while the woman who was supposed to be my soulmate played house with another man across town. And she never called us, not even once. No birthday cards for the children, no apologies, not even a single check for child support. It was like we'd been completely erased from her existence, like we were just a chapter in her story she decided to rip out and burn. But I refused to let her devastating betrayal define who we became. I raised my children with fierce love, unwavering discipline, and brutal honesty. I taught them not to hate her poisonous memory, but I didn't lie to protect her either. They grew up knowing their mother had chosen herself over them, and somehow, miraculously, they still grew into absolutely incredible human beings. Madison became a pediatric nurse, Kevin opened his own successful auto repair shop, and Connor, sweet, sensitive Connor, enlisted in the Marines. I couldn't be more proud of what we'd accomplished without her toxic presence. So when I opened my front door 26 years later and saw her standing there, hair streaked with gray, eyes exhausted and desperate, that same expensive suitcase in her trembling hand just like before, my first instinct wasn't the rage you'd expect. It was complete bone-deep confusion. And then, with ice-cold clarity, I asked, "Why now, Serafina?" She couldn't answer at first. She just stared at me like I was the one who had disappeared into thin air. "I made a terrible mistake," she finally whispered, her voice cracking with the kind of manufactured sorrow I used to beg for decades ago, back when I wanted closure, when I desperately needed answers, when I cried alone at 3 in the morning wondering what fatal flaw in me had driven her away. But now, standing there after all these years, I felt absolutely nothing but an eerie, peaceful stillness. My children were all grown and thriving. My life was stable, meaningful, and beautifully peaceful. And here she was, trying to shake the dust off ancient history like 26 years of absolute silence meant nothing. "Vincent died 4 months ago," she continued, her hands shaking like autumn leaves. "I've been completely alone ever since. I thought maybe we could have a conversation about the past." She looked past me expectantly, like she was waiting to be welcomed back into our house, our sanctuary, like no time had passed at all. I didn't move a single inch. I didn't open the door any wider. I simply studied her face, the deep lines around her eyes, the bags of regret beneath them, and thought about every single precious moment she'd missed. Every scraped knee I'd bandaged alone, every birthday celebration, every graduation ceremony, every milestone where her children had looked around hoping she might materialize. Madison was the first to hear about her mother's shocking reappearance. She was absolutely livid, not sad or curious, just pure, white-hot fury. She doesn't get to waltz back after 26 years and pretend she still matters to any of us, she said over the phone, her voice shaking with rage. Kevin didn't say much, just made a low, disgusted sound and muttered, "She's got some serious guts showing up now, I'll give her that." Connor, always the family peacemaker, just asked gently, "Are you okay, Dad? Do you need me to come home?" None of them wanted to see her. None of them asked where she'd been or how she was surviving. They had built extraordinary lives without her presence. We all had, brick by brick, year by year. And now she was standing in my front yard acting like time owed her a second chance she'd never earned. "I want to reconnect with them," she said, standing on the porch of the home where I'd raised her children alone, acting like she hadn't detonated a nuclear bomb in our lives nearly 3 decades ago. "I want to make genuine amends for everything." I actually laughed out loud, not because anything was funny, but because the sheer audacity was absolutely staggering. "You don't get to want things anymore," I told her with crystalline clarity. "You gave up that right the night you walked out on your family." But part of me couldn't just slam the door in her face. I wasn't that kind of man, even after everything. I invited her to sit on the porch I'd rebuilt with my own hands. I made her tea like a civilized human being. I listened to her sob story with detached interest. She told me how her fairy tale life with Vincent had crumbled into dust, how the freedom she'd once craved became a suffocating prison, how he never wanted children of his own, how she missed the ones she'd abandoned, how regret clawed at her every single night like a wild animal. But absolutely none of it changed anything fundamental. I looked her directly in the eye and said with perfect calm, "They're not your children anymore, Serafina. You forfeited that privilege 26 years ago." And I meant every single word with every fiber of my being. She had walked out on her family when they needed her most. And now she wanted to walk back, and just because her backup plan hadn't worked out the way she'd fantasized. The selfish entitlement was breathtaking. The days that followed were strange and unsettling. Quiet, but not the good kind of peaceful quiet I'd grown to cherish. The kind of tense quiet that comes after an earthquake when everything looks intact on the surface, but you know something fundamental has shifted beneath your feet. Madison messaged me again, her protective instincts in full force. She better not come anywhere near me or my children. Kevin didn't even bother pretending to be civil anymore. Tell her if she wants a family reunion, she should go dig through the ashes of what she burned to the ground. And Connor, sweet Connor, the only one who still called me every Sunday without fail, gently said, "You were everything to us, Dad. You were both parents when she chose to be neither. She doesn't deserve a place in our story anymore." And he was absolutely right. I thought about every single school event I'd attended alone, sitting in auditoriums surrounded by couples, while I cheered for 3 children who deserved so much better. Every night I'd sat by Madison's bed while she cried over a mother she could barely remember. The way Kevin had stopped talking altogether for almost a year after she left, and how I used to lie awake wondering if someday she'd realize what she'd thrown away. Now I knew she did regret it, but regret isn't a magical key that unlocks doors you've welded shut. It just reminds you of all the opportunities you destroyed with your own hands. One quiet afternoon, she left a letter tucked under our doormat like some fragile peace offering. No knocking, no conversation, just an envelope with our old wedding photo inside. She'd written on the back in her familiar handwriting, "I'm sorry for everything I destroyed. I know I don't deserve forgiveness from any of you. I just wanted to say goodbye properly this time." That night, I stared at that photograph for hours, not because I missed her, but because I felt absolutely nothing. That version of her, the woman I'd married and trusted with my whole heart, had died the day she chose someone else over the beautiful life we'd built together. The broken woman who'd stood at my door was a complete stranger, and I owed that stranger absolutely nothing. Not my time, not access to my children, not a piece of my hard-won peace. A month later, Connor and I stood in our backyard grilling steaks for the whole family. My grandchildren were running through the sprinkler, their laughter echoing through the warm evening air like music. Madison and her husband were on their way over. Kevin had texted earlier, "Don't start the good beer without me, old man." And in that perfect moment, surrounded by the family I'd raised with my own 2 hands, the family she'd abandoned, I felt a quiet peace that had nothing to do with storms weathered and everything to do with knowing I'd not just survived, but thrived. I'd carried the weight of her betrayal for decades, and finally I'd set it down for good. She may have walked away all those years ago, but I had walked forward, and I never once looked back. That's the difference between someone who destroys families and someone who builds them from scratch. Have you ever had to rebuild your entire life when someone you trusted completely betrayed everything you believed in? The strength you find inside yourself will surprise you.